Good morning, everyone, and let the record show that we have a quorum present. In fact, we have a full house. All members of the committee are here today, and thank you all for coming. Today, we're going to start our public hearings on the multi-employee pension plans based on the reports that have been published recently on the website of the Department of Pensions and Labour. And our first part of the morning, we're going to be dealing with the government administrative side of those pension plans, i.e. the civil servants who are concerned with those. I think, Mr. Austin, you wanted to make some opening remarks as to why you're not recruiting yourself today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, certainly I want to say good morning to all in attendance, particularly the accounting professionals, many of whom we have not seen since this COVID lockdown commenced. But it's great to see all of your smiling faces, and certainly a very special good morning to those persons tuned in to today's hearings. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do have a very short statement to make as it relates to my participation in today's hearings. While I accept, Mr. Chairman, that it has been the regular practice for councillors, guided by the chair, to recuse themselves from participating in hearings whereby the ministry in which we share responsibility is being questioned, I have had considerable discussion on this point with the Honourable Attorney General, among others, and I am now of the view that the previous guidance provided may, if not be wrong, perhaps may not necessarily be in the best interest of the committee. And should we, as councillors, and I count the Councillor Connolly as well, who often also conducts ourselves in this regular practice, should we as councillors continue with this practice, we would be failing in our constitutional responsibilities as members of the Public Accounts Committee, having been duly elected to serve as such by the membership of the Legislative Assembly. Moreover, Mr. Chairman, as councillor, I have no decision-making authority within the ministry which would prevent my participation, and the only way, as I understand it, I would be precluded from participating in these meetings would be if I assume the role of acting temporary minister, which, whilst it does happen from time to time, today I am not acting as such. Finally, Mr. Chairman, as we are focusing on the recently published National Pension Board's annual reports for the period of 2008 to 2016, which predates my arrival in this Honourable House in 2017, I can see no personal or pecuniary conflict that would prevent my participation in this week's hearings. As such, and as always, I invite the chair, should he disagree with this position, to outline why and make a ruling. Otherwise, I ask that members, in their usual fashion, welcome me with open arms and a warm heart. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Mr. Harris, I don't have, as I've explained to you and other members of the committee, way back when we made the decisions that councillors should recuse themselves whenever we were dealing with any matter under which they may temporarily assume responsibility for as an acting minister, was the moral and ethics and the picture that it portrays for the committee. I have no legal precedent on which to stand. This was a decision that was made collectively, not simply by the chair, that we would adopt that stand. Because while I don't entirely disagree with your rationale in particular to this matter before, that it was before your time in the ministry, we could still find yourself in a position of conflict, because some of the things that we are going to have to request, suggest, and demand from the administrative arm this morning is that there would be no reoccurrence of these multi-annual delays in publishing reports. One of the questions I have is where is the 2018, 2019 report? But if you have been advised by the Attorney General and other people that there is no possibility of any conflict, like I say, I don't have any legal precedent on which to suggest that you don't take part. I have some concerns, which was part of the rationale that the committee used in making this decision in the first place, in that you run the risk of putting yourself in an untenable position with a chief officer in a ministry for which you work daily or which you may assume temporary responsibility, in that if you question him too hard, you run the risk of having an adversarial relationship. If you don't question him hard enough, you run the risk of belittling the committee and its work. So it's one of those things that the committee in the past has said that we thought it was just best to do, but I have no legal precedents on which to exclude you from the committee.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for that. Certainly, I pride myself in serving the Public Accounts Committee with integrity the past 3.5 years, and I don't anticipate doing any less. Certainly, as you pointed out, I am not acting as temporary minister at this time, and therefore there is no moral or ethical grounds in which for me to recuse myself, and I thank you for your remarks.
Mr. Saunders.
Mr. Chairman, morning. I just want to register my disagreement with this departure in the policy, just for the record. What we have now is the issue that has always been the constitutionality of councillors. I mean, Erskine May has never, I've always, in Erskine May, private secretaries and other secretaries weren't normally allowed to serve on Public Accounts Committee. So now we have a situation where we have a constitutional committee established by Section 87 of the Constitution, which is a Public Accounts Committee, basically coming into conflict with unconstitutional positions. So I just want to register, I mean, this was, like I said, something we agreed collectively as a committee before. I was not party to whatever discussion or what came from the Attorney General. And I would have appreciated if that was a departure for something for the committee, that at a minimum, what the Attorney General said should have been shared with us as committee members. Not that I doubt the member from Prospect, but at a minimum, since this is a material departure from what we had agreed before in the past. Now, in terms of going forward, we also need to understand why we're here today. We're here today because the reports that have been made public were made public by the Ombudsman. It means then at a FOI hearing, when this was actually challenged back in 2018, when the councillor would have been part of the ministry. We're here because either the ministry or the department refused to provide the public with information that had to be taken to the Ombudsman. So let us establish something here. The ministry or the department did not want this information to be made public, and it came via the Ombudsman. So it is in that caveat, I just want to make sure I register my discomfort with this departure of what we had established before.
There you go. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just respond, and again, quoting standing orders. Standing Order 77 states, there shall be a standing select committee to be styled the Public Accounts Committee to consider reports of the Auditor General. The Public Accounts Committee shall be nominated by the House at the beginning of a new session following a general election and consist of 5 elected members. The quorum shall be 3 members, including the chairman. Again, notwithstanding the remarks made by the member from Bordentown West as it relates to members being also members of the government, my membership in this Public Accounts Committee was duly decided by 19 members of the elected members of the Legislative Assembly, so I'm here by their authority.
And Mr. Chairman, while we're here, can you ask the member to also read where in the Constitution or the standing order is the appointment of councillors, which have now created this conflict? Because let's establish this conflict is created because of the unconstitutional creation of councillors that exists nowhere in our Constitution. So I just want that registered also.
Okay, it's what it is, and I will do my best to balance the act as chairman. I will invite you to bring Miss Amy Wollaston in, please.
Sorry, is it on? Okay. Thank you. Sorry, my first time. Okay. I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give in this honorable legislative assembly shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Good morning, Mistress Wollaston. Did I get that right?
Wollaston.
Wollaston, okay. And you're the Deputy Director responsible for pensions in the Department of Labour and Pension, Cayman Islands Government.
That is correct, yes, sir.
Okay. What we ask is that the first time you ask a question, just identify your person by name, yourself by name and position for the record. You don't need to do it every time. Once it's recorded, that's all we need. Okay. First of all, we want to thank you for coming to give evidence before us this morning, and you would have been informed that it is related to the multi-year pension reports that were published on your website a couple of weeks back.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the panel of this is your first time, we will ask questions. It is quite proper and possible that the Financial Secretary or the Auditor General may want to ask a question. I will handle all of that. So without any further ado, we'll get started. And I think, Mr. Byrne, you wanted to ask a couple of opening questions?
Yes, sir, through you. Good morning, welcome. I'm
Morning.
trying to establish the governance and the day-to-day responsibility of the National Pensions Board and the role of the Superintendent of Pensions. So with these next couple of questions. What is the role of the Superintendent of Pensions?
First, let me clarify something. As you will be aware, there was an amendment passed to the National Pensions Law in 2016. As part of that amendment, the role of the superintendent was abolished and replaced by the role of the director. So just so the committee is aware, the director is the appropriate title at this point going forward, okay? The director is, as it states, the Director of the Department of Labor and Pensions. He has overall responsibility for the entire department, its budgetary matters, as well as all of its responsibilities, statutory responsibilities. With respect to pensions, that would include, our department is the private sector regulator for all the, is the regulator of all the private sector plans, as well as the regulator for all the private sector employers in the area of both labor and pensions.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chair. Oh, ma'am, and you forgot to state your name and your position.
My apologies, my apologies.
No problem.
Amy Wollaston, Deputy Director of Pensions.
Okay. What is the role of the Chief Administrative Officer of the Board?
Okay, so under the National Pensions Law, there's a National Pensions Board, and the Chief Administrative Officer is basically their administrative person, the person who is responsible for implementing their decisions, dealing with their agenda, et cetera.
Okay. Do both of those positions report to the same person or the same entity?
Well, the director, based on government structure, reports to the chief officer and the ministry. In this instance, the director is also the chief administrative officer, which is actually what the law says. So in that aspect, he deals with the board. So in effect, from a government point of view, he reports to the chief officer, but from dealing with the board matters, he has to report to them.
Through you, Mr. Chair. How are pension plans in the Cayman Islands established?
So under the National Pensions Law, in order to establish a pension plan, there's actually an application process, which is via our office. And then the pension plan, for example, would submit their trust deed, which is required by law, or their plan documentation, which is required by law, and all the supporting information that goes with it. Then that is vetted by our department. We do rely on the Solicitor General and the Attorney General's chambers to provide us with advice. So that forms part of the process before the plan becomes actually registered. Once the department is satisfied, and of course legal is satisfied that everything is in order, then the plan becomes registered.
Are pension plans approved by the board or the superintendent?
The pension plans are actually approved by the director. So as I said, there's an application process, and we do get legal advice as part of that application process, but it's the director who actually signs off. We have a certificate that is issued. It's the director who actually signs off on the certificate.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. If any more, I'll follow up. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the witness. The accounts for the National Pension Board or the director, are those prepared separately, or was it meant to be a separate set of accounts, or is that something that's done collectively?
I'm assuming you mean like financial accounts?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So because the department is part of government, the department is not a statutory authority, it's a government department. Therefore, our accounts are absorbed in that of our ministry's accounts, and then they would therefore be audited by the Auditor General's office. So there are no separate accounts for the department or the board.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. When I was actually reading the law, the reason I asked that question was Section 84 of the National Pension Law 2012 revision, and that one, I noticed it wasn't changed in the 2016 revision, but what it had said was the Auditor General shall examine annually the accounts and financial transactions of the superintendent and the board. And I was trying to understand, I don't know, well, the Auditor General is here, trying to understand exactly what the purpose of that section of the law was or what it related to in terms of why that was included, because I know other government departments, it's not there. So I was just curious as to why that was standalone included in the law, if it was meant that there should have been something separate. Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Saunders. We too need to understand what we're going to do in response to that provision in the law now. Clearly in the past, because there hadn't been any published annual reports from the unit, we couldn't undertake any specific audit work over and above the work that we do as part of the ministry. But now the annual reports are up to, at least in draft form 16, 17, we'll need to consider what our response is. And if the committee wish to make some recommendations in that regard, that'd be most welcome.
I would assume that that accounting is related to the percentage that is paid in as part of each pension. Each pension plan has to pay a certain amount into government in order for government to provide the administrative services as a form of protection for the members of the plan. So is there no separate accounting or of that, or does your office review those accounts on an annual basis to make sure that the contributions that have been paid by the individual plans is the amount that should be paid? Because is it based on, I think it's based on members, or
Correct.
so much per member? Yeah.
Correct. The fee is $20 per member and is paid annually. So as part of the responsibilities of the office, the plan is initially registered with the office, and then there's a renewal process which occurs every year. As part of the renewal process, there is an application form. The pension administrator pays the fee, but we also get information. For example, we get the audited financial statements of the pension plans. We also get information about the members, and we cross-reference that information to ensure that the amount that's actually being paid is appropriate.
Yeah, for instance, according to numbers in the report, for 2019, that figure should be somewhere in the region of 1.4 million. And it was my understanding when they wrote the law that that money was intended to make sure that government put in place the necessary staff and regulatory processes to regulate these funds. So you don't have any control over that 1.4 million. That goes directly into the Treasury?
That's considered entity revenue. So it comes to our department and is used to fund our budget.
That was the kind of thinking I was leaning towards, Mr. Chairman, and I'm glad you brought it up. Because all the other regulators in government literally prepare standalone type accounts of their activities. And if in essence this unit is the regulator for pensions, I would expect at a minimum, consistent with other regulators in government, where there is a fee that you charge to maintain the regulatory function, that this would be along that same lines too. So that's, I mean, really, it was kind of vague. I wasn't sure, and that's why I wanted clarification on it. But I got the feeling that it was meant as a regulatory body, and then it should have its own standalone. But I will defer to the Auditor General.
Mr. Chairman, Gabriel Akubi, who's the auditor responsible for that ministry, has just clarified that that check is done as part of the ministry's audit. So every year when we audit the ministry, we look at we verify the $20 per person per plan with the amount of income coming in as part of the income work that we do on that ministry's audit. So that's already done. Whether that is what was intended by that section of the National Pensions Law or whether it's something additional, as I said before, is something we probably need to ponder further with Miss Amy and her colleagues.
That I can confirm that that was one of the big selling points when the law was introduced in 1997, was that they had to pay these funds in, and therefore government was assuming the responsibility, instead of a statutory authority being created to regulate these pensions, to regulate the pensions and to publish these reports. What is your annual budget compared to that 1.4 million, more or less, or?
Our budget is that's about half of our budget, thereabouts.
Okay. How many staff do you have working for you?
In the pensions unit specifically?
Yeah, well, the question I just asked was about the pension unit specifically, not the Department of Labor and Pensions.
Okay. Well, the budget isn't separated in that way because it's it's now, when that law was written, it was a separate department in and of itself, right? But now the decision was taken to merge two departments together to become the Department of Labor and Pensions. So therefore, our budget is organized as a single department. I couldn't say the aspect that's completely pensions and completely labor. So all I can tell you is that the budget is, that's about 50% of our total budget. Okay.
How many employees
Sorry.
do you have, including
The,
yourself?
the department itself or pensions?
No, pension section.
Pension specifically has 7, including myself.
Okay. Sorry, were you finished, Mr. Saunders?
Sorry, if I can
Huh?
clarify.
Okay.
Sorry,
Yes.
if I can clarify. When I said 7, perhaps I should say 8 because I didn't include the director in that number. So I apologize.
Oh, okay. But I would assume that he doesn't know a lot of work on pension. He just provides the oversight, and that's your role to manage the pension section. My next question would be: Do you think that 7 employees are sufficient to provide the kind of regulatory function and oversight to these pension plans in the private sector?
I think our department does the best it can with its resources, but I think some additional resources would be helpful, yes.
Mr. Chairman, through you. Can you say how many pension inspectors do you currently have on board just now?
In our unit, I'm sorry, I hope you don't take offense. I clarify terminology if people don't get it correctly, right? I hope nobody takes offense.
No,
I just want to make sure we're all using the same terminology.
Right,
So
right.
avoid confusion. So we actually call them senior pension officers in our unit. There are 5.
Thank you. When was the last time the board met?
I believe the last board meeting was sorry, let me think about that 1 minute. 2020. I believe the date was in February of 19.
Excuse me? Who's who? Sorry, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Can you advise, I know it from your list on the website, I don't know if that's up to date or not, that all the board member appointments had expired. I don't know, maybe that's not current.
That is actually correct.
So what is the position regarding the renewal or new appointment of these persons to the board?
That's actually a question for the ministry more so than myself. I can tell you that there were, I believe the number is 7, but as you said, the information's on the website. I believe the number is 7 members, of which 5 expired in October of 19. There were 2 others that did not expire until April of this year. However, those 2 wouldn't be enough to constitute a full board. So when the chairman and the deputy chairman expired in October of 19, then the board could no longer function from that point forward. Obviously, I don't control
No,
anything
no,
about
we-
board
we- we
appointments. That's why
understand
I suggested that's a
No, no,
question for the
no.
ministry. I couldn't do that.
Trust me, it will be.
Sorry, if I could just say, I did say, I believe it was February. If you'd like, I can confirm later. But I
Okay.
believe it was February. It certainly was 19, given that the board expired in October.
Okay. February 2019, and 5 members expired in October 2019, and nobody, and the other 5 expired in October 2019, and 2 have expired since that.
That would be
Sometime,
correct, yes.
yeah, in 2020.
Sorry, the board's membership is normally staggered, just for consistency,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
et cetera. So the latter two wouldn't expire, as I said, until April of 2000.
Chris, can you bring me a copy of the Public Authorities Law, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the witness, the annual reports that I prepared, what exactly, because I notice the law is very vague in terms of what the report should contain, but in your estimation, or your best guess probably, what exactly, when you put the annual reports out, what exactly the message is it that you're trying to get across to the public?
The board actually agreed a template with the ministry for the content of the reports. And that's what's reflected in, particularly in the latter of the 8 reports that have been released. The template is reflected in the content. So it's meant to be a summary of the activity of the director and the National Pensions Board in terms of its responsibilities, or their responsibilities.
Was it their intention to report on all pensions or just some pensions or just some pension plans?
It was intended to be a summary of the activity of that particular year.
The reason I was asking this question is that based on the, just looking at the annual reports, and just a matter of, I guess, consistency, I noticed between 2004 and 2012, those reports averaged between 6 to 12 pages. And then from 2012 to roughly 2015, they went up to between 42 to 51 pages. And then for 2016, it came back down to 26 pages. So there was a kind of, I can see where it was improving year on year in terms of the information becoming more detailed, more getting out there, until it reached up to, like I say, like 51 pages. But then I noticed the last report that was released in 2016 dropped back down to 26 pages, which is roughly half. So I'm trying to figure out exactly what was decided to put in these reports. I'm just trying to get some level of consistency. Because there was a lot of stuff that wasn't reported prior to 2013, 2014, 2015 came in, and then 2016 it kind of dropped back again. So I'm trying to figure out exactly, where we want to get with these reports, ideally.
Sorry, what was the last part?
No, I'm trying to figure out exactly, like in terms of the template, because if there's an agreed template, and for 3 years it averaged between, say, 42 to 51 pages, and then it dropped back down to 26 pages, then I'm trying to figure out what it is in 2016, because 2017, 2018, 2019, well, put it this way, I wouldn't expect it to get back down to the 26 or the teens again when we were getting more detailed information, a lot more information in those, the 3 previous reports prior to 2016.
I would expect that the content that you see in 15-16 report will be the similar content going forward. The years of, I think it's 12, 13, I think about that time. Going forward, there's a period of time in which there was, there's a change in board, obviously. There's a change in ministry. There's a change in leadership in the department as well. So, and it was during that period that the template was actually agreed. So I think what you see is, at some point you see less information than, as you said, you see more statistical information being provided. And then once a template is decided, that's now reflected more so in the 15-16 content. And then that would be the guide going forward for the subsequent reports.
Earlier you said that it was the intention of this report to capture I guess, all activities of the unit. But I noticed even in the annual reports, and we had asked the Auditor General to go in and take a look at the underlying data that made up some of these reports. And just to kind of give you an example, for 2013, the total amount of assets under management as per the annual report was $866 million. But when we looked at what it is that the when the Auditor General went in and looked at pretty much all the different pension providers, it was actually roughly 1.6 billion. So there was around 794 million short in terms of the differences. In 2014, the reports had a little over $1 billion. The Auditor General numbers had 1.66 billion, which is a difference of 641 million. In 2015, again, it was a little over $1 billion and 83 million. The Auditor General report again had 1.66 billion, a difference of 577 million. And in 2016, the actual reports had 1.1 billion, and the Auditor General, again, with all of the source information, was around still 1.66 billion, a difference of 558 million. So I'm trying to understand if the reports were just to look at just the multi pension providers, because if that is the case, then the numbers or the variance would be slightly different. But looking at all the different entities that would fall under the all the pension providers, and then look at the annual report, I mean, having a difference of almost $800 million in 1 year, I'm trying to understand exactly what exactly it is that these reports were trying to achieve, because I would have expected that at a minimum, the report would have included all the entities that the National Pension Office or the National Pension Board would have been dealing with, as opposed to just one group. And that's what I'm trying to understand here.
So with respect to your question, the data in the report reflects both what we call multi-employer plans and single employer plans. Just to clarify the term, multi-employer is a plan that has multiple employers participating that have no connection to each other. So for example, the Chamber of Commerce, Silver Thatch, those are the ones that are more publicly known. But there are also employers that we call single employers, where the plan itself is only comprised of the membership of a particular employer. For example, Butterfield has chosen to have its own plan. So both, the data from both plans is represented in the report from a summary perspective. Now, when we do calculations with respect to the assets under management, as you referenced, it's important to bear in mind that each pension plan has a different financial year end. So if you look at the audited accounts, you may end up with a different figure than if you look at the data as a particular date. So when we've compiled the reports, we've used the 30th of June as the date upon which the data is in relation to. That date is used because it's referenced in the law as, sorry, let me go back. I'm trying to give you enough background to understand. Under the legislation, if a pension plan doesn't provide a year end, then the law provides a year end. So a lot of the pension plans will use the 30th of June as their year end. At one point, that was also government's year end. So we have used that date as the date upon which we capture the data. So there are some audited accounts that have that date as their year end. There are others that do not. The larger ones have that date. So the decision was taken to use that date in order to calculate the assets under management. If the pension plan doesn't use that date, then we actually ask them to provide us with the information as at that date in an effort to be consistent in terms of the date that's actually applied when the amounts are calculated. I hope that helps.
Actually, no, it does not. No. I did understand from going through the different reports. And again, I want to thank the Auditor General Office for the work that they did in terms of providing this information to the committee. But that's one of the things that kind of really threw me off. I mean, I do recognize the different year ends and everything else and the different accounts, but 794 million difference in, even if it's a 6-month period, it is still way too much. Because what I've noticed is that the numbers report in the actual reports are closer to just the total of the multi plans. To give an example, in 2013, for example, Your report at 866 million. The auditor general, just for the multi, was 815 million, so a difference of 51 million. In 2014, a little over $1 billion for the actual reports. The auditor general is 941 million, so there's a 78 million difference. And I do recognize some essence of timing and some level of subjectiveness. 2015, 1.1 billion, 994 million, $89 million different. And in 2016, 1.1 billion in your report, and a little over $1 billion in the audit general, so 61.5 million. But so I kind of get the impression as if though those annual reports are more on the multi pension provider, the multi plans, as opposed to the other plans. Because like I said, when you have difference of 794 million, 641 million, 577 million, 558 million, there is no way that those assets could have moved within a 6 months or a 12-month period. So I think going forward, and the whole idea here, and just to the ease of listening public, this is the first time, as far as I'm aware, that we're actually going through these reports. So it is, well, from the public standpoint and from the Public Accounts Committee standpoint, there was no set from what the public would expect. So the purpose of this hearing really is to learn from what had happened in the past, but to see what we can do better in the future. I just want to put that out there from the context, because we're not trying to do any ambushing or anything like that. But at a minimum, what we would expect going forward is that these reports would look closer to what it is in terms of everything that it does. And the reason why this was a big issue for me and where it started on my radar was when the government, when we got the annual reports, and it was basically saying, just showing assets of a little over $1 billion. And then we remember the premier statement with the pension plan that they were looking to pump $500 million into the economy. The first thing that jumped out is, wait a minute, how can we have $1 billion in assets, and if people can take 10,000 and then the 25%, there is no way the premier would have agreed to take $500 million from a pension plan that just had $1 billion being reported, which would have been 50%. So that is really from that standpoint. Now, I realize from the Auditor General's report, as we move 2 years past the 2016, that the number was closer to $2 billion, which in essence would then put what the Premier said in more consistent of the 25% being around or the 500 million. But when you put $1 billion out there in terms of your assets, and we're trying to get 500 million in the local economy, there's no way it could have been that far off. So I felt a little bit more comfortable when I saw a 2 billion number, but this 1 billion number needs to be expanded now to include all the pension plans so we can get the proper idea of what it is that we're working with.
Sorry, am I allowed to ask a question? Okay. I provided information to the Auditor General's office that I'm assuming is what has been provided to you. Can I just ask, when you did your calculation, did you use, for example, we also have some plans which are called like international plans. There are a few where let's say the plan itself may have 1,000 members throughout the whole world, but they may only have 5 people in Cayman. So in providing information to the Auditor General's office, I provided whatever they asked for. I just want to ensure when they did the calculation, my explanations I provided were taken into consideration, because if that information is included in your calculation, then that to me would be incorrect.
I should know, just to put it back in the bigger picture, what the number I was trying to understand was when the 500 million was announced by the Premier, what generated is 500 million estimation of that money coming into the local economy. Now, based on just the annual reports that we saw up to 2016, we were showing the pension at around $1 billion. Now, what really threw me off is that if you go back and you look at the ESO companion statistics, and you go way back, and you start looking at the total payroll for the last 20 odd years, and have an idea of 10% of that plus whatever would have been dispersed, we kind of would have came out about $2 billion in total pensions across the within the private sector. So the 2019 number, I think, is much closer to around what that would be, because I mean, I don't know in terms of withdrawals. But when I got a report in 2016 that says $1 billion in assets, and there is no way between 2017, 2018, 2019, and now that it would have been another billion. Because, yeah, exactly. So the point is, the 500 million could have only come about with a $2 billion worth of assets. Can we agree on that? If you're using a 25% threshold that to get 500 million in the local economy, and we're looking at roughly 25% of the pension, you have to be looking at a part of roughly 2 billion. I mean, that's the way in which I'm looking at it. So when I get a report in 2016 that tells me there's only $1 billion in assets, because remember, no, we did not get the Auditor General's report until literally last weekend. As far as I was concerned, we were just talking about $1 billion. And from that standpoint, I'm like, there's no way $1 billion in assets, even in 2016, could not have grown to $2 billion by 2020. So that's what kind of threw me off, because if that's the case, and these numbers came out to be $1 billion, then the public would be asking, how did the Premier arrive at 500 million coming in from $1 billion worth of assets? Now, for $2 billion, it makes sense, but for $1 billion of what you have in the report, and that's what I was going by, then that's where I had to think that. And as regards to the other point you noted, I did note that some of them, because due to my past life, I do recognize that even say Merrill Lynch, which is no longer here, which was 300 and something million, that was for all their non-Cayman Islands employees also, including the Cayman Islands employees. So that one left. That was like 300 and something million. So I did take that into consideration, and I did call around to the different people. But what I was trying to reconcile, in the public interest was that 500 million estimation where it came from. And like I said, as political as it may be, there is no way the Premier could have $1 billion in assets and say he expected 500 million using 25%. He may be a lawyer, but he's not that far off. So that's really what I wanted to understand was the 500 million, where it came from. And the 2 billion explains it, but the billion in the report doesn't. And that's what I needed to reconcile. And that's the reason why we asked the Auditor General to go in and look at the source information. And that was the genesis of it.
Okay. I trust you realize I can't speak to anything the Premier has said about $500 billion. I don't know where that number came from, and I couldn't speak to that. You'd have to ask him or his ministry.
No. Well, I mean, just using a rough maths. If you have $2 billion in assets, and you say to people that they can take the first 10,000 plus 25% of the remainder, even if you ignore the first 10,000, 25% of the 2 billion is 500 million. So I could understand that number, and that's the number really I wanted to understand. So at a minimum, the 25% of the 2 billion is the 500 million. Now, like I said, prior to the Auditor General getting the source information, the only number that we had working with was the 1 billion as per your report. And what I'm saying is there is no way that the 500 million could have come from that 1 billion using the 25%. And that's really what we wanted to reconcile. And so I am really grateful for the Auditor Generals and our team for doing this, because if not, it would have been a complete different conversation this morning. So I'm really happy for the additional information that she provided.
Just a point of explanation. At the request of the Public Accounts Committee last week at the administrative meeting, we have prepared a briefing which all members have got. Ms. Wollaston, I'll make sure you get a copy, but you've been working with Gabriel, who's prepared the briefing for us. Mr. Saunders, I provided the fuller breakdown at his request underneath, and I've just asked the clerk to go and copy that so the other members have got the fuller breakdown that went into the working papers, because I'm conscious at the moment that Mr. Saunders has got that information, but not the other members of the committee, and I'll get you a copy too. But I would reiterate that when Gabriel did the work, as Ms. Wollaston said, you've got pension plan providers that are multi-fund, single fund, different year ends, different currencies, and also, as Ms. Wollaston said, some that the Cayman component of the pension fund is only a small part. So there are all sorts of issues around trying to reconcile numbers. I don't know if, Mr. Nakubi, do you want to say anything else? Okay, thank you. But we'll get the clerks getting the sheets
I
to
have
you.
a couple of questions. What kind of supervision can you provide to these international funds in terms of the local membership or is it just reported? I mean, what kind of jurisdictional control do you have? Do they have to get approval from you to have the 5 people in Cayman in their pension plan?
What happens in practice is the 5 people are usually not Caymanians, and they've come from their home jurisdiction to Cayman. In order to comply with the legislation, they have asked us to recognize the plan that they're using from another jurisdiction rather than the person having to contribute potentially twice in their home jurisdiction and here. So in one case, for example, we have asked just to get confirmation from the regulator on the other side that everything is in order, and then we've accepted that.
Okay. What, wait, I have one other question on the board makeup. Who was the last chairman of the board?
Brian Bothwell.
One of the things that jumped out at me too is the growth in the members that you're reporting for 2019 is 73,519. I trust that that includes people who were members of left the island?
Yes, yes.
And does it include people who retired as well, or?
Yes. It would include anybody who has an account that has a balance for whatever reason. So they may not necessarily be physically here any longer, but the fact that they joined the pension plan, were employed in the Cayman Islands, and the pension plan still holds funds for them, that they would be included in that number. And then also bear in mind that there are persons who have more than one account across multiple plans. So they may have an account, for example, in Silver Thatch, but they may also have an account in Chamber.
So they're counted twice?
Sorry?
They're counted twice?
Correct, yes, because they're paying a fee for every membership that they have.
Okay. Second question is, can you determine if somebody joined a private pension plan 5 years ago, left that pension, that employer, therefore that pension plan, right? Went into another pension plan with another employer, years later, came back to the original pension plan. Is he counted as a second member, or does he or his pension then become cumulative, i.e., what he had there before that he left behind, right? When he rejoins that pension plan, is there an accounting where he gets credit for his previous contribution, or he remains 2 members of that same plan? If you understand what I'm trying to say.
No, he's one member, but he may have more than one account within the same plan.
So if I was a member of the chamber, for instance, chamber plan, and I left 3 years ago, went to work for somebody else, I now come back with an employer and rejoin, right? I don't get, my pension is not cumulative in terms, I have 2 separate pensions with that same company? How is that resolved at retirement?
So depending upon the plan, this goes to structure of the plan itself. So you have some plans, for example, that all the contributions received, regardless of the number of employers involved, are all in one account. They can identify which employer based on various coding, et cetera, right? So you may have, for example, Amy's Bakery, and then you may have JP Morgan, strange example, but nonetheless. It would all be in one account, and they can tell the difference. Other pension plans have a slightly different structure, and they would actually separate the contributions into separate accounts for each employer. But when it came time for retirement, then they would simply access the funds collectively.
But anyway, I can't imagine how the person is losing because they're not getting the benefit of all his accounts added together. The percentage that he's cost for auditing and everything else comes out of, so he's paying for auditing 4 or 5 times if he has 3 or 4 accounts. Anyway,
This to me, this goes to a point of public education, if I can bring that up, because I don't think people realize that for every account they have in each plan, not necessarily, sorry, I'm just trying to think of the best way to express it. So if you have an account in pension plan A and you have an account in pension plan B, you will always be paying more costs in the long run, because each pension plan has its respective costs. It has to be audited, it has to be invested, it has to be administrated. You have to pay government its fees. I mean, you're always paying more. So the law does allow people to consolidate. People don't always choose to consolidate, but the law does allow them to consolidate. So as an individual, you can say, well, yes, I have 3 accounts in 3 different plans, but no, I want to put it all in my current pension plan and transfer it all in. The law does allow for that to occur. The member is well within their right to do so. I just don't think people fully understand the benefit of doing so.
process of portability, I think it was how it was addressed in the law, an easy one, or is it a very complicated effort in terms of the assets of each pension being how different value?
It's a relatively easy process. It's a matter of filling out some paperwork. Granted, the law, in order to action it, the administrator would have to have the value for that particular month, of course, and then transfer the funds over to the other pension plan. But from the member's point of view, the process is straightforward. You fill out a form with the plans. Both you have to sign, obviously. The plan you're transferring to also has to sign, saying they agree to accept. You provide identification, confirmation that you no longer work for the original employer, and then you deliver the form or transfer the form. And that's the straightforward process. It's not difficult. It's just I find a lot of people don't realize the benefit in doing so. They actually think by having multiple plans, they're helping themselves. But in fact, from a cost point of view, they're actually hurting themselves.
But my personal experience, I have had instances where the plans discourage people rather than promoting the transfer. They discourage people from transferring their funds. And while the legal requirements are from your end may be a simple form, it is not, how shall I say, it is not met with enthusiasm by the plan from which you are transferring. And I have instances where people have been discouraged because one of the things that they have told people is that because a unit in pension plan B, right, is valued at less than a unit in pension plan B, when you come across, you're going to have less units in this one there than what you have there. And the return on investment is based on the units that you have. And so while it should not be complicated, because it was one of the things that I fought the Chamber of Commerce on way back in the 90s, and there was this same question of portability and multiple accounts. In a national pension scheme, there's no such thing. Mr. Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could just redirect the conversation going back to the absence of the National Pension Board's annual reports for a period of a number of years, I think effective 2008 to I think 2015, 2016. The national pension law has been plagued with a number of challenges since it was first passed in 1998. I think we all would agree. Since that time, the legislation underwent a number of lengthy consultations and amendments, starting, I believe, with the Mercer Report, March 2007, which highlighted a significant amount of non-compliance issues, which fell largely at the feet of pension providers, which they at the time broke down into 3 broad areas. They are non-compliance in the law based on ignorance or misunderstanding of the law, non-compliance resulting from unclear or fundamentally impractical legislation, and intentional non-compliance due to indifference, greed, philosophical belief, or belief that the national pensions law would not be enforced. The national pension law then again was revised during the 2013 to 2017 administration under the former minister, which I believe saw some 450 recommended changes from over 40 different sources, including legislators. My question to the witness is, would you say that the confusion brought about by these various rounds of amendments to the national pensions law since June 1998 contributed in some way to the lack of appropriate publishing of the annual reports as is required by the law?
I would definitely agree with you. There have been successive amendments, some of which you didn't even name actually. There was an amendment in 2010. There was an amendment in 11. There was our proposal for a national pensions bill in 2012, which I believe got to the first reading in the LA. There was the amendment in 2016, and of course there was the amendment just now in 20. So as legislators, I'm sure you realize the considerable amount of work that goes into the whole process of having an amendment in the first place. So yes, I think that has greatly impacted the fact that the reports weren't published. And in addition to that, let us also remember there were about 3 elections in the whole process as well. And we've had change of ministers and change of chief officers as well. And all of that process together, every time you have a change of minister, of course you have to have a briefing. If you have a change of chief officer, you do the same. And all of that contributes to the workload of the department and the completion of the task.
But the reports were ready. The reports were done. It just wasn't published because we have them now. Or were all these reports done after the ombudsman ordered them to be released?
No, the reports were done at different times, but I believe the minister in the finance committee in November, I think it was, of 19, acknowledged that they were all completed at that time.
I know.
Sorry, I'm just trying to understand here. The law is clear with regards to the board and the superintendent having a responsibility to prepare, well, the director, well, to prepare these annual reports to present to the minister to be tabled to become public. Are we to understand in essence then that the board and the director didn't get the annual reports done because there were amendments to the law or they kept making changes to the law? That's what I'm trying to understand here. If that's the reason why no report was made public since the 2008 financial crisis, where just about everybody's pension money was invested. I'm trying to understand if that's the excuse being given here today. Thanks.
Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm looking for something. Of course, because I'm looking for it, I can't find it right away. Anyway, what I'm saying is that the law does say the reports have to be prepared. No one can say that's not true. However, the practicality of having to deal with the responsibilities that the office still has to run, that we still have to honor our clients, that we still have to deal with the legislative arm and the necessary changes to the law. At the end of the day, unfortunately, there are only 24 hours in any given day, and we are all tasked to serve the government of the day, and therefore we do our best to do that. The fact that legislative change is necessary is absolutely important, but it also contributes to the order of priorities and the way in which you're able to accomplish what you're asked to do. That's all I'm saying.
Mr. Chairman, I want to just make one thing here clear, and I'm going to read what the law says. The National Pension Law 2012 revision, and this part wasn't changed in the last go-around. It says, this law may be cited as the National Pension Law 2012 revision. This law applies to pension plans established and maintained for the benefit of employees in the islands. For the benefit of employees in the islands. And, Mr. Chairman, I want to tell you right now, regardless of which government comes, this law and this money is for the employees in the islands. And we had one of the worst financial crises in recent time, going back to 2008. The last report that was published was June 2008. The peak of the financial crisis happened in September 2008, when it started, the Lehman Brothers collapse and everything else went sideways. The fact that not one single report of people's hard-earned money was made public since that time for people to find out the impact of what has happened to their hard-earned money that they work for. I'm going to tell you right now, it is this culture that needs to change, because people need to understand something. This is people's money. And you had mentioned something earlier about governance, which we want to get into. Because when we get into start regulating these pension plans and looking at what the Auditor General had prepared, and I start looking at individual pension plans, one of the questions I want to ask is, if you have 13 plans lined up, and you see, in this case, 14 plans lined up, and 12 of them made money, and 2 of them lost money, what do you do with those 2 plans that lost money? Do you go in and take a look to see what it is that they did? Because if everyone is making money and somebody else is losing money, these are the kind of questions that people need to understand. And one of the reasons now, and you have seen it with the public now, where there's this constant belief, and people have said it over and over, that their pension money has less money in it than what it is that they contributed. And the truth of the fact is this: if within 20 years you have somebody's money and you can't make money for them in 20 years, there's a very slim probability you're going to make money in 40 years. You know, when everyone else is making money. And with regards to members not being able to change plans, how can you realistically expect someone to change from one pension plan to the next if you have no idea what the pension plan is even performing? Because I'm not going to move my money from one pension plan to the next if I have no idea what that other pension plan is doing. And it is this part of the public education. Yes, there needs to be some level of public education, but the public needs information in which to make a decision. And if the information isn't in the public, you cannot reasonably expect them to make any decision when it's not there.
In response to your question, first, as I said earlier, the annual reports represent the work of the board and the director or the department. The issue about, or the information about your a specific pension plan's performance is accessible to the member from the pension plan itself. All of the pension plans have audited financial statements every year. They're required to have them by law. They're filed in our office. In addition to that, most pension plans have annual general meetings, which will facilitate the opportunity for a member to ask questions if they have concerns about anything, performance, expenses, etc. So while these reports were not necessarily prepared and presented to the House, the members still had the opportunity to obtain information about their specific plan by going to their specific the parties that are dealing with that plan. You were speaking about the issue of comparing plans, and there was envisioned, which the 2016 amendment, which was passed in LA, which was under Minister Rivers, actually includes a provision to require the publication of expense ratios and investment regulation returns, or I should say investment returns. And the reason that is actually in the legislation is because it is recognized that more information is necessary in the public domain so that people can realistically compare how is pension plan A doing in comparison to pension plan B. So you understand not just investment performance, but also expenses. So it's acknowledged that more information is necessary, and that's why those changes were made.
Chairman, hold on, sorry. A while ago, thank you very much, Ms. Amy. A while ago, you said that most pension plan have these annual general meeting. This is what section 10B1 of the National Pension Law Revision. This is going into the regulations. This is what it says. An administrator shall, within 6 months of the date of the financial year of the pension plan, hold an annual general meeting pursuant to section 16.4H and ensure that a report or explanation is presented or discussion held as applicable in respect of the following matters: the audited financial statements, the expense ratio, the investment return, the formation of advisory committees, breaches of the law reported by the auditor or unreported, and any change in respect of the administrator, including a change to the membership of the Board of Trustees. 10C also goes on to say, the administrator shall publish the expense ratio and investment return of the pension plan, calculated in the manner prescribed under the National Pension Fund Investment Regulations 1998 revision. I read this out for a reason. I went about, in preparing for this session today, on just about everybody's website and start looking at information that would have been available to many of the different members, and also what it is that they should be put in the public domain. And the truth of the fact is, the amount of information that is out there, it is actually very lacking. Now, I would consider myself to be at least an above average person understanding numbers. And I can tell you, for what is out there, and for the amount of money that we're talking about, there's a culture that needs to change in this country. Now, this is not something that is unique to just the pension administrators. It is something across all the different regulatory bodies. And we're happy to be starting today with the pension, and this is the reason why we have invited the pension providers inside here also. Because there's the regulatory issue, which you and others will be dealing with earlier, but then there's also the part of the public trust, which we expect to get a better understanding from some of those administrators. But in terms of the actual supervision and everything else, and I've also looked at what it is that we have in our law. I've also looked at what it is that even the UK have in their law. And I can tell you, there is a lot more work that needs to be done with regards to the pensions. But we're talking about $2 billion now, and people need to understand that this is a lot of money. And for what some of these pension companies are doing, and more importantly, allowed to do and allowed to continue to do, is a problem. And this is what it is that we need to kind of get sorted. So we do recognize that this is the first time we're having this kind of public hearing on this issue. And I know it won't be the last, but at a minimum, we need to start recognizing that there's a cultural shift that needs to happen. And the pension providers also have a role to play. Now, I can tell you from reading all the different reports, there are staffing issues where your team do not have enough resources to police what it is that we do have. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a little bit more laid back in my approach this morning, because there are resources issue. But you cannot realistically expect a team, a department of 8 people, to be policing at least 9 active pension providers and 73-something thousand accounts. And we start looking at the complaints and everything else, it is a lot of work, especially if we expect the regulatory function to work. So there's a lot of work that we need to do to beef up your department from a regulatory oversight position. And I'm open from this hearing that the public would recognize that when the minister comes back and say we need more money for your department so that you can be more effective in policing and managing everything else, we can go with it. But the truth of the fact is, we have people that are hell-bent in taking as much money from the people's pocket without doing the work. I mean, this latest one now, where some providers are charging $150 processing fee to give people their money, in addition to the other fees that they're charging people $150 to process their own money, in addition to the other fees that they're charging. Those are the kind of things that we expect to be dealt with. And I can tell you that because someone reached out to me on that very same thing last night when we start moving out. So these are the kind of things that are happening. And I put it out there for your team to be aware of it and start getting into these people who are hell-bent on putting their hands in people's pocket and nickel and diming them for every cent they can have before they take their money out.
Can I ask, please, the $150 you're speaking of, is that for the emergency withdrawal?
Yeah.
It is? I can tell you that we're not aware that that fee is being charged. We are aware that, and I can tell you that because I'm personally spearheading implementation on this. We are aware that some administrators, not all, are charging a fee. Some are charging a fee as low as 25 US. Some are charging a fee, I think the highest amount that we heard was 100. I certainly never heard 150. So I would certainly be interested in knowing who that is.
I will definitely get them to reach out to your office.
Please.
And report that.
Please, because I can tell you that I spoke to every administrator over the past 2 weeks and specifically asked information about if they were charging fees. And some administrators have said no, they're not charging anything, and others have said they are, and as I indicate, those are amounts. No one said anything near $150.
But the question I have is, I know that legislation, as I recall, does not prohibit the charging of a fee, but I don't recall it enabling the charging of a fee either. So why are they being allowed to charge any fee at all?
Okay, so the 2020 amendment did not cover the issue of fees for the withdrawal. However, in the National Pensions Law itself, which is the 2012 revision, there is language in relation to fees being charged that are considered to be reasonable. And then under that basis, the pension plan would then be able to charge fees to the plan itself in order to cover. But here's the thing. If the administrator, so you have two groups of people in this circumstance. You have the people who are taking a withdrawal, and you have the people who are not taking a withdrawal. If the administrator does not charge the people who are taking the withdrawal, what will end up happening is the people who have chosen not to take a withdrawal will end up paying the cost for everyone, because the administrator is going to charge, they charge administration fees, having to process applications, having to deal with the investments, turning those around, cashing those in order to get the funds necessary to pay out the sum for the person who is taking the withdrawal. So somebody has to pay the cost. And in this instance, the most equitable thing to do is either A, they absorb it themselves, which some of them have chosen to do, not the fund. And the other instance is charge the person who wants their money. And that's why a fee is being charged. Because otherwise, the person who's chosen to leave their funds in has to absorb all of the costs, the security, the part-time staff, whatever is necessary in order for the persons who want to take it out.
But the question I would have is, how is the administration fee established in the first place? Because the annual or administration fee that they certainly should include all activities, and a withdrawal is just another part of the administration of that person's fund, which he's already paid them to do.
But in this instance, first of all, the law this is an amendment to the law. This is a completely new section. You have that issue, and then you have the issue of the volume. The volume. I can tell you, based upon the last set of stats that I received, there have been over 20,000 approved applications. No one could anticipate a volume of that great. And in fairness to the administrators, it's a lot of work on their part as well, because they have all of that processing to do. So that's why the fee is being charged. We have, I can tell you that there have been questions about the fees. I've asked them myself in order to determine if the fee is reasonable or not. We've probed into it. That process is still ongoing, but we have probed.
Right. Because I would argue that last year, the year before, and the year before, and the year before, and the year before, they got the huge administration fee and they did nothing.
Mr. Chairman, one constituent has sent me this, which they gave me their summary of their statement from inception. And throughout the life of their contributions, and this was from summary, the headline read summary from inception to 30th of April 2020. During that time, they contributed $49,902.79 in the total contribution. The earnings over the entire lifetime was $11,667.96, and the admin expenses was $1,927. When I look at the admin expenses of $1,927 against the total contribution of $49,902.79, that represents a rate of 3.8%. When you look at the earnings of $11,667.96, the admin fee represents 16.5%. I can tell anybody right now, if you have admin fees that are 3.8% of your total contribution, and you consider that that is even above the current prime rate right now of what banks are charging in terms of prime, this is part of the problem. There are some years you can't even, you're losing money. There are many years in which some of them haven't made any money, but this 3.8% fee is too high when people can't even get that on deposits today. You're lucky if you can even get 1% on your deposit, but you have to pay 3.8% in admin fees. This is part of the problem. And like I said, this is our first time going through this, and there is a cultural issue that needs to be sorted out. And this 3.8% is the starting point of solving this issue. You're not making that on your deposits, you're not making that on investments, but 3.8% is too high. And for someone to have taken your money, invested it, and then make 16.5% equivalent of what it is that invested for you is also a problem. And this is what the public is ticked off about. And one of the things, I know you have been here past your time now, and we have other witnesses. And Ms. Amer, really, well, for me personally, there are a lot of different questions that we have. And as we move up to the director and to the chief officer, we're open to get a little bit more to some of those issues. But in a nutshell, this is where the problem is, and this is what the public is having a problem with. And I've said it before in my debate, 9 pension providers or whatever for 40,000 employees is too much. That cannot work, that is unsustainable. And one of the reasons why we asked the Auditor General for the source information is that I did not want, as the witnesses come in, to really penalize some of the good pension providers with some of the bad ones, because we didn't want to paint everybody with the same brush. In fairness, I can see where some providers are actually trying and mean the public well, but there are also some of them that ain't no good, and we need to go deal with them, and that's the reason why they themselves are scheduled to come here. So, Mr. Chairman, that is it for me for now, because the director is coming, and the rest of my questions I will take up with the director. But I just want to say, Ms. Amy, thank you very much. I do recognize the challenges that your department is under, and I would encourage you, and like I said, looking at the UK model, and especially some of these investments, to work with SEMA and look with SEMA in terms of some of these guys, because I can tell you one particular company I went through trying to understand their investment, and they're literally selling for somebody else, and had to go find their parent financial statements to dig into their business. And I'm going to tell you one thing, if that's who they had their money with, I would really have a problem with, but that's a different story, and we'll deal with that as it comes around. But I just want to say that much, and good luck with everything, and I really hope you get the staffing that you need so you can police this the proper way.
Thank you. Thank you for your support.
Yeah, thank Ms. Emi for coming. And are there any more questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give to this honorable legislative assembly shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Good morning, Mr. Bernard E. Banks. You're the Director of the Department of Labor and Pensions, and you would have been informed that we're looking at the annual reports from the Pensions Office over the last several years. The first question that you answer, we ask you to identify yourself by name and title so that it appears in the record, but you only need to do it once, right? I guess I'll lead off on this one and say, who do you hold responsible for compiling the reports, the annual reports on pensions?
Yes, good morning. Bernard E. Banks, Director, Labor and Pensions. The compilation of the reports that is before the committee at this point in time was done by the Superintendent of Pensions, Ms. Amy Wollaston, and the board.
You as a director believe that it is a responsibility of the Director of Pensions and the board to prepare the annual reports?
Correct, sir. At this point in time, it's the director and the board.
Okay.
In 2017, February 2017, the director became then responsible and a central authority figure under the national pensions law. Prior to that, it was the superintendent of pensions.
Okay. And the director that is spoken to in the national pension law is you as director of labor and pensions, or Ms. Emer Wollaston as director of pensions?
As it stands now from the amendment, it's myself as director of labor and pensions.
Okay. You might want to look at nomenclature so that we don't get that, we can eliminate that confusion as to who's responsible. So my next question is, we know that there were delays in getting these pension reports out. That's what it is. Where are you in terms of ensuring that the 2016-17 report is completed, that the 17-18 report is completed, that the 18-19 report is completed, and actually we should be looking now at the 19-20 report. When can we expect those reports to be available or be completed by your office, and you follow the law by submitting them to the ministry? When do you expect to have those reports before the ministry?
Well, the draft 16-17 would have been submitted as well. So we're hoping, well, I'm going to ensure that that is done by the end of this year, definitely. And the other ones, if I can get them submitted end of this year, I will endeavor to do so as well. But at this point in time, all of my resources has been put towards getting the older annual reports that was up to the superintendent's tenure into getting them into the LA at this point, because it wouldn't have made sense for me to start submitting and putting resources into doing my current reports, which is more recent reports, and then I wasn't going to get them submitted because the older ones hadn't been submitted. So all of my resources and energy has gone into getting those reports completed and tabled to this point.
Okay, well, I will accept that your responsibility ends with delivering the report to the ministry. But why is it going to take until the end of this year to get the draft 16-17 completed?
Due to the current working conditions, we would need to look at the amount of details that we'd have to complete into it, getting those stats, figures, and have those compiled. And that would be really the challenge in terms of logistics. But outside that, we'll do our best to get them going forward. But in my view, the hardest part to this point in time is getting the old ones in, because it's getting the ball rolling after that, and then it's easier to compile it. So whereas I could say that I'm going to have all of them at the end of this year, I wouldn't want to give an estimate or guesstimate on the time frame that I really can't predict, because it's taken so long even just to get the other ones done.
Anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you. If the law requires the board and the director to prepare this report, and in essence you have no board or the board members have changed, because I mean we're talking about now going back to 16-17. How do you work around the fact that basically maybe half the board is missing, or the board isn't there that would have related to the 16-17 year? Because it'd be a little bit unfair to basically go and appoint a new board now and then come back and ask the new board to go report on what it is that the previous board did. So I'm trying to understand how this is going to come about. And the thing about it is, in the law, it basically says the superintendent and the board. Now, I don't know if it means the superintendent should have a report and the board should have a report, where you can only report on what it is that you did and then leave the board for something else, or is a situation where it was meant from day one to marry the two, that the superintendent and the board would have a report. I don't know, but I mean, from the law, when it says the and, it basically says, I mean, what's to stop the director then, in essence, from preparing their own report and sending to the minister and then leaving the board to sort out their issue separately?
That's my understanding as well, is the fact that really it's a joint report where it's the superintendent/director and the board. But there's also a possibility of the director, in the absence of a board, then issuing a report to the minister as well on the conduct of the department. So that is one of the things, again, like I said, logistics of getting those reports done now going forward is something that I would need to be cautiously optimistic on the time frame with it, but at the same time be realistic.
I'm curious, just from attending those board meetings, I mean, why is it then that the board didn't see fit in 17 and 18 and 19 to see to it that they compile the law, in essence, to make sure that they do this annual report? I mean, I'm trying to understand. I mean, I haven't been a board member before that we actually had to do reports. I'm just curious, like, what do you sit down in a meeting, you meet and you say, oh, by the way, that's not going to do this? I mean, how does that even come about?
Yeah, and that's one of the things, when you look at it, I mean, ultimately everybody wanted to get these reports out because there's been a lot of work put into getting the reports done. And the past board has been instrumental in getting the reports verified by the previous chairman and the members, and then ratifying those and submitting those. So the previous board that just expired did a lot of work in terms of verification, ratification, and meeting on that. And a lot of emphasis has gone into getting those reports, the backlog reports done, and getting them to the point where they could be submitted. So in all fairness to the board, they did work quite hard and trying to assist the department in getting these done, because ultimately, as a regulator, it's one of those issues, it's a long-standing issue that we needed to get resolved. And that was the emphasis on doing that and getting it forward where we can then start to build that momentum and becoming compliant and keeping compliance.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, and just to give a heads up, because I have some other questions I really want to get into outside of the reports, but just one thing on the reports, and just to give you a heads up, I have the 2012, 2013, 2014, 2013, 2014, and 2014, 2015 reports. These are actually quite thick and range between 41 to, I think, 52 pages. This draft annual report for 2016 is, I think, 26 pages. And I'm going to tell you right now off the bat, I mean, it hasn't been tabled yet, it hasn't been thing there, but please let this not be the template in terms of going forward, because if it is, it's a big step down from the 2012 to the 2015 reports. I just need to put it out there that this still requires a lot more information. And at a minimum, I expect to be that we get better as we do this. And looking at these three reports and then stepping down to this one. If it's just a filler where you want to get 16, 17, 17, 18 out, and then 2019 and beyond becomes a super type report, then I can live with that. We're just trying to get this one to check a box to comply with the law. But please let this not be the template going forward. That's all I have to say on the reports, Mr. Chairman.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that report is incomplete. It was known to be incomplete and not ready for publication, but it was ordered even in draft form to be released, and that is why it is released there, and that's why it clearly still has draft. So the information in that is not hard and fast, so to speak. So it has a lot more stuff that has to go into completing that report as well. So that would not be simply the end of that report.
That's all I needed to know. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is it a situation where, I'm trying to understand why the delay in these reports. Is it a situation where the underlying documentation that had to be submitted by the individual plans is not available, or is it just that the department has not gotten around to doing it?
Again, because this predates my tenure as director, my understanding of the situation was that some annual reports were done, but they required some changes and updating, just similar to what we're discussing with just the draft release there that Mr. Saunders made. So a decision was made to have the board reports actually upgraded and produce more information, more relevant information, and there were some changes in it. Again, to what extent, I'm not sure. But in terms of delay, I'm believing that's what it is. One of the other challenges is, again, most of the work was being done by the superintendent of pensions as well. So it became a situation where even after the Department of Labor and Pensions was created, then that information really still was resting in one person's hands. And after that, then it becomes more difficult to start to have somebody else assist in getting the reports done. So you're left with one person essentially holding the information and dealing with it.
Based on information the committee received earlier, it appears that the revenue paid in by pensioners, by employees, to your office is in the region of 1.4 million. How much do you have the information as to what the pension division of labor costs administratively now?
Sorry, I don't have those figures broken down in terms of individual costs, no.
You see, the difficulty I have is that every employee in Cayman is paying a fee to have your office regulate their plan. And because we don't have the reports, we don't know whether that regulation is being done or not. And if it's a situation where the government is not providing you with the resources because this money is going into to central revenue, then we need to know, because the employee out there in the private sector is paying government. They're not getting this for free. And if the 1.4 million is not covering the regulatory administrative cost of the plans, then the government needs to increase that fee or whatever it does in order to provide adequate regulation and supervision of these plans and timely reporting. Because this information we're getting now is other than us going into it in detail with the assistance of the audit office and looking at trends, is basically useless. There's nothing we can do about those reports now that are 4 or 5 years old. And hearing that we're probably looking at the end of this year, so we're currently 3 years behind now, and that we're not likely to get 2018 and 19 until the end of 2020, and it could well slide into 2021 given the conditions under which we're operating now. I think you as director has a responsibility and an obligation to make sure you have the resources, or at least you request the resources from the ministry. And can you confirm to us that you have asked for resources and you're not being given resources by central government to do this work?
No, do we always need more resources for the volume of work? Yes, we do. Currently, the major operational issues that we have is in terms of we have some staffing needs, but we also have some expansion of office needs. And that's one of those things that going through the ministry, we're looking at extending our office in DLP to take up one of the units that was vacated by NWDA when they moved. And that would then allow us an opportunity to get more staff, increase more staff, and provide better services as well. But in terms of overall resources, we do need some additional resources. We do need to look at some restructuring of how we do things and looking at the business process aspect of how we do things to avoid backlogs and delays and processing things. And that is something that I'm actively looking at. But in terms of overall resources, what we have asked for, we have 2 additional posts that we were given recently, and we're going to be advertising those and trying to fill those as well. So we do have needs, but we have to take it in a gradual step, because it wouldn't at this stage be prudent for me to ask for all of the additional human resources that I need without having the office space to put them, because then that becomes a problem. So my intention is to get additional resources as soon as we get the office space to accommodate that growth.
Can COVID-19 prove that they can work from home, so you may not need the office space, but we can save that expense and let them work from home. But the important thing here is that I think you all have to recognize that this is a statutory obligation, and if one of the employees out in the private sector decides to take you to court because he's paying for services he's not getting, I don't know how you can defend yourself if you cannot document that you have asked for resources and you haven't been given, and how the government then is going to say we refuse the resources based on the need not being justified, because this is a serious obligation and a requirement, statutory requirement, that nobody seems to, take seriously.
And I follow your point, Mr. Chair, but at the same time, we're here because I take my responsibility as director seriously. And a lot of times what can happen is that the older something gets, then nobody wants to accept that responsibility, and it just kind of rolls on. I'm here because I'm accepting that responsibility. That is my responsibility to get those, and that is why I put the resources into getting those reports tabled.
Have you given any consideration to maybe getting a short-term consultancy or some reassignment from other departments just to clear up this 3-year backlog that we're now facing? Because my concern is that what I'm looking at next year is a 4-year backlog instead of a 3-year backlog.
And that is something that I have considered, and I'm going to ask for additional temporary resources in order to have these reports completed as well. And normally my ministry, if I ask for it, they will provide the resources. So that is one of the things. But like I said, really it's all about the fact that we got the momentum. Days have been completed. It's now easier, even though I follow the train of thought that it's possibly going into a 4-year backlog, but a 4-year backlog is easier to deal with than a 12-year backlog, because the information is still more current, and we're getting better in terms of the information that we have.
You are confident that all of the information and supporting documentation that you need to prepare those reports have already been submitted to your office on an annual basis from the private firms?
In most regards, yes. I'm pretty sure that there's going to be information that we need to collate. But again, those are things that we can do easier because there's a shorter time frame. But additional to that, I mean, we have been doing annual reports even as well for the ministry that is required by the ministry. So those are annual reports that are being submitted and kept up to date. And those are even reference points, again, that keeps track of the department's progress as well. So it's not in a complete vacuum where there hasn't been anything done or there's no information there. But like I said, the hardest part was getting the information released when it was centralized into just one person's hands. That was the most difficult part of it.
How long has it been since you have had a functioning board? When was the last board meeting?
I do believe the last board meeting would have been in 2019, just before I got seconded to the ministry.
Have you asked the ministry why the board hasn't been, why a board is not in place, or why a board hasn't been appointed?
We do communicate to the ministry in terms of the appointments on the board, and it is something that we've had discussions on.
Do you have any idea when a board might be appointed, or no commitment?
No, sir. Because again, I'm not directly involved in the appointment of boards. Boards are appointed, and then we work with whatever complement the board is. The department, the director, has no input into determining who is put on the board.
I better not ask. Are you comfortable with that kind of position? Are you suggesting that these boards are appointed with no reference to you as director at all?
Typically, the board nominees aren't vetted by the director.
You have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just getting into the overall supervision of the pension plans, can you just walk this committee and the listening public through in terms of how do you supervise, or what's the day-to-day, or what's the process in terms of supervising these entities that your office regulates in terms of for pensions?
Sorry, just to confirm, you're asking about the pension plans?
Yeah, like the actual supervision of like a typical pension provider, like what is it that you, sorry, excuse me, your office does in terms of supervising one, that like just walk us through like a typical supervision process, what that would look like.
Well, in terms of supervision process, the actual carrying out of it is the superintendent of pensions has operational capabilities on that. But most of the interactions that we do have in terms of the pension plan administrators at this point in time is about providing guidance, what the law says, if there's any ambiguity in it, providing briefing notes on legislation, passing forward any known views of pension plan administrators. Then there's also some desk-based reviews that is carried out by the superintendent of pensions, and where necessary, then an inspection as well.
Sorry. The law requires, or the regulations requires that the administrators submit annual financial statements to your office, the expense ratios to your office, investment return to your office, the formation of any advisory committee to your office, breaches of the law reported by the auditor unreported, and any change in respect to the administrator, including a change in the membership of the Board of Trustees. Do your office get that information from everyone that you regulate?
Yes, sir, and I think I didn't understand your previous question in that regard, because you said like the day-to-day interaction with them. Whereas, for instance, the delinquency reports are monthly. The annual registrations and audited financials are yearly.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't be your typical everyday. So I apologize for not understanding. That's why it is. But yes, those are things that we do get from everybody.
Question could have been clearer. So I apologize. In terms of the audited financial statements, are all providers at this point current in terms of providing audited financial statement?
To my knowledge, yes, sir.
Okay. And I noticed Ms. Amy Winch was here earlier. She had said that most pension providers have annual general meetings, but the law requires all of them to have it. So what happens to those providers that don't have the annual general meeting? How do you guys deal with those?
But it should happen, and the superintendent of pensions monitors that annual general meeting compliance aspect. So it hasn't been brought to my attention that one has failed.
Well, she said earlier, that's why, I mean, she said it, and I repeated it, where she said most of them have annual general meetings, but all of them needs to have annual general meetings.
If there is non-compliance with the law, it wasn't brought to my attention, to my recollection.
Now, in terms of the audited financial statements that are submitted to your office, what is the process that you and your team go through in terms of reviewing those financial statements, and what is it exactly you're looking for? You know, I'm just trying to understand exactly, because ultimately, you guys are the safeguard or the tip of the spear in terms of protecting the public from some of these entities. What exactly is that you guys do in that regard?
Well, there's somebody who is actually designated, I've asked to look over those consistently to make sure that somebody always has eyes on those audited financials. And some of the things that he looks for is the investments, are they within the prescribed ranges that is given in the investment regulations? What type of report is it? Is there any anomalies in the report, any concerns by the auditor? And those are things that he actively looks at. Also, in terms of the registration amendments, then you would have to look at the number of members compared to on the list compared to the fees that are produced to the government. Those are things that also would have to be taken into consideration.
Thank you very much. And if you see a pension provider consistently losing money, year in, year in, year in, when everyone else is making money, then what do you guys do?
Unfortunately, on the current restrictions, as long as we have this investment regulations in place, it's quite prescriptive and restricted. So as long as they've made their investments within those ranges that is prescribed by the investment regulations, then we can't really have anything else to say because they've invested in that class of assets in the prescribed amount.
But at a minimum, from the public's interest, and this is why these annual reports now become important. Whereas even if you don't want to name an administrator, wouldn't it be fair enough to even put a table report out that says, well, these are the audited financial statements of the different entities. You could leave the name off. The public can choose whichever one it is that they want to show exactly who's making money versus who's losing money. Because ultimately, these are the kind, because if they're all not having annual general meetings, you know, and how then is the public protected from people losing their money? Because and that's what I'm trying to understand here.
And that is something that was identified and had been put into play previously by Minister Rivers as well, because the 2016 amendment law, the provisions in that had provisions relative to looking at expense ratios and increased transparency in it, but a lot of it hinges with us having a new investment regulation. So those are things that after you get that, then you look at a statement of investment policy, and those are legislative changes that really need to happen in order for us to go that route and give everybody not just figures, but an apple-to-apple comparison on what the pension plans are actually doing.
Just to put a little bit of context to my concern. I mean, I look at what it is the Auditor General prepared, and she and her team put together for each of the pension providers their opening net asset value, their contributions and transfers in, benefits paid and transfers out, and net movement from operations. And I mean, just looking, for example, in 2013, of the 14 providers listed, 2 lost money, 12 made money. In 2014, 1 made money, 1 lost money, 13 made money. In 2015, 5 of them lost money, 8 of them made money. In 2016, 5 of them lost money, 7 of them made money. In 2017, everybody made money. And in 2018, 3 of them lost money and 10 of them made money. Now, looking at 2018, just to put it in context, and just looking as a net movement from operations as a percentage of the opening balance, one entity lost 9%, or it represented 9% loss. One lost 8%, but then 4 others, and this is just a multiple thing there, one made 10%, one made 7%, one made 15%, and one made 5%. Now, automatically, for me looking at this, Those guys who have lost money in 2018, bearing in mind that the stock market and just about everything else was swimming in 2018, that Trump liked to brag about too. For you to have basically down 9% from your opening balance or 8% from your opening balance when your peers are making between 5 and 15%, that for me, and bearing in mind that they're all operating under the same investment regime, something has got to be fundamentally wrong that you lose 9 or 8% of what you open up with in 2018 when just about everybody and their auntie were making money. Now, this is the kind of stuff, for me, as a representative of the people, would want in the public domain in terms of, because I believe there should be a requirement that once you're taking the public's money, we don't care what it is you're doing with it, that information needs to be made public. You can't be taking the public's money and keeping information private. And these are the kind of information that I expect, even if the law doesn't allow you to name the individuals, these are the kind of stuff I expect to be looking for in the reports. Because one of the things that I am concerned about in your office, and I'll say not recognizing the competency of the staff, but we're talking about supervising $2 billion worth of investment. And at a minimum, I would really expect to know some real savvy type individuals. And even if they're not in your department, I know that they exist in other departments, including the Office of the Auditor General, to start saying, can you look at these financials and tell us or give us your opinion as you're putting together your annual report to say, well, here's what it is that we can expect. But what we can't have is people still losing money. And then when you do get into some of the financial statement and you're seeing exactly, you're losing money. One of them in particular lost money last year, but they collected all their fees. There's no way I can be paying you money for basically not performing. You know what I mean? And ultimately, this is where we need to get to. Because now, with people now getting their pension statements and seeing what these guys have been doing, and I'm glad they see it now, as opposed to waiting until the next 20 years when they're 65 or whatever. Because my argument is simple. If you can't make money in 20 years, you sure as hell ain't going to make no money in 40 years. And I don't want to wait till when people are ready to retire, then they end up capping and to go into NAU, looking to make it up, when for all the years they were working, people are just getting rich from their fees and they have nothing in which to retire on. And I think that is a culture, ultimately, that I really want coming out of this exercise, is that you guys start putting your foot down on these guys. If they're not performing, let the public know, and so people then can move their money from them. Now, luckily for me, I don't got no money in none of these guys that losing money. Thank God for that. But at least I don't think I have any money. I don't even know where my pension at. But this is what we're expecting in these annual reports. Stuff that the public needs, because ultimately this law is there for the employee benefit. And the reports need to be written where it is the employees understanding what is it that their money is doing. I mean, it's nice to put all the other stuff inside here, but ultimately, as a person who has a pension in the private sector, none of the information in this report was of basically little use to me. And that is what it is that we need to get to the public, is write it through their lenses, and that's what we want these reports to reflect, from their lens, because ultimately the law is there for the employees. And that's really what it is I want going forward. What has happened, we can't change that. But going forward in the future now, this is where we need to learn from those mistakes and start beefing it up. We have the expertise in central government. If they're not in your office, we have them. It takes not just send a financial statement over to Sue and her team or to Cindy and her team at SEMA and say, guys, take a look at this. Give me your views. Because one of them I went searching for last night, and I can tell you, I saw where their parent company was invested in. And I can tell you, as a former banker, I wouldn't be doing business with them. But again, that's just me.
And through you, Mr. Chair, I completely take on what you've said, sir, and that's something that I'll look forward to having that put into the annual reports, and I'll take advice on that and see if that's something we can have accommodated as quickly as possible. But like you rightly pointed out, I mean, the report that you have now from the Auditor General is something that I still don't have access to. But it's one of the things that, sorry, no, the information, but it's done by the Auditor General. But that process had never been done before until the release of these reports. So that is one of the things now that even though it creates some fuss, it creates some good things in it. So whereas these reports weren't tabled before, they weren't published before, by the publishing of those reports, now there's more to work with and suggestions going forward that we will take into consideration. And I completely agree with you on the whole transparency and being able to do a comparison, apples to apples comparison on all the pension plan administrators, because really it is the employees that should make that decision.
Earlier, you said in an answer that there may be changes had to be made to a report. Is those changes coming from the board or coming from the ministry after you submitted the reports to them?
No, I was talking about in terms, sorry, Mr. Chair, I was talking in terms of the draft report that was incomplete, in terms of how it was laid out and what was there. So again, recognizing that it is actually incomplete, then obviously there will have to be some changes made to it in terms of adding stuff or even in the context of where it falls. But overall, the superintendent, director, and the board makes those reports, have them signed off by the chairman and now the director, and they would be submitted to the ministry.
But there's no situation where the ministry will send a report back and ask for things to be changed.
Apparently previously, I can't say to what extent it was changed or whatever the format would have been, because again, it predates my tenure, but I've made to understand that the minister was not previously happy with the quality of the reports that were submitted.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, just sticking to the actual reports, and one of the things that we had pointed out previously in terms of looking at what the annual reports had, which was only the multi-employers, but it also omitted the other pension providers. And that resulted in 2013 a difference of $794 million, in 2014 a difference of $641 million, in 2015 a difference of $577 million, and in 2016 a difference of $558 million. Now, your office has responsibility for all of these, and I'm sure you would agree that omitting $794 million worth of assets is a lot of money to be excluded from any report. So at least going forward, can you, even if you have to break them out between what the total is in the multi and what it is in the single providers, I am sure those employees also, which are covered by this law, would still also want to know what is happening with their money. Because you're talking about 800 in 2013 alone, just looking at that figure, the multi-employers at 866 million, and the other group had, I didn't break that out, sorry. But I mean, like I said, yeah, 866 million, and the other group basically had $794 million. I mean, it is substantial in terms of the amount. You know what I mean? And so from that standpoint, at a minimum, those employees also need to have some comfort at a minimum that their plans are being looked at too. But $500 million difference in terms of being omitted from the report, that's $500 million. I mean, that is a lot of money. And it is still employees that still need to know. So again, like I said, it is what it is. And then the main purpose here now is to what it is that we can do going forward. And ultimately, I think by putting information out there and people start seeing who performing, who not performing, when they start moving some of those money out, those bad players in the market will just naturally wither and die because some of them need to go. So.
Through you, Mr. Chair. That is something that definitely, again, I'll take into consideration and trying to put forward in the upcoming annual reports. But from my understanding that it was really the multi-employer pension plans that the assets were being accounted for rather than the single employer pension plans as well. So I believe, and again, these are reports that were not written or ratified by me per se, because it was the superintendent and the board. But my understanding was that it was the multi-employer pension plans that were being looked at there because that was more of a public interest. But going forward is a suggestion, definitely. I'll look at implementing that into the reports that is coming from my office.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Earlier on, when yourself and the chairman, and he asked you the question about staff and space, and you gave your answer. When you see or when you have the various shortcomings that have come up today, that you've seen them, have you put this in writing to whoever you answer to? Is there a record of you making requests or saying this is not right or this is coming up short, this is a need this? There is records on file of you requesting and stating these shortcomings that, as you have seen them.
Anything relating to HR matters, I do my best to always inform my ministry, and normally that is sent by email. So I normally keep in touch with my ministry
And
very well in terms of sending emails.
Not only in HR, but also in policy, or also in various other things, like member from Bordentown West brought up. You have put these things that you have seen in writing that could be said, this is the law, but it could be worded better, it could be fixed better. You have put those things there for us to look at eventually.
And we have put forward recommendations for changes in terms of legislation. And really right now, even in legislation, one of the main drivers that we need to get done is the full implementation of the 2016 revision, the amendment, sorry. We need a full implementation of that, and that is something that we're working with our ministry to try to get that done as well. And the investment regulations, again, there's a lot of stakeholder input that has gone into even getting to the point where we were with the regulation. So those are needs that we have communicated to the ministry and have advised them that those are things that needs to be followed up.
What is holding up the investment regulations? Because this is 4 years since the law was passed. Is it the board? The absence of who approves the investment regulations, the drafted instructions? Who decides what goes to the legal department to be drafted as investment regulations? The board or the ministry or you or who?
In terms of drafting instructions, most of the drafting instructions come through our office in conjunction with the ministry. So for instance, any policy feedback that we need, we go through the ministry first. So everything is really done through the ministry.
No, but what I'm saying is, who is responsible for drafting these investment regulations that are now 4 years due?
Sorry, the initial consultation was, and drafting was being done by Morneau Chappelle. Morneau Chappelle was an outside consultant from Canada, and they were the ones that were doing the initial drafting, feedback from the relative stakeholders, and they were doing that. And then conjunction with our office and the ministry.
And what kind of contract did you have with them that they haven't done it in 4 years and you're still waiting on it?
From my understanding, it's really left on a matter of some steer that is needed from the ministry in terms of where we're going with certain aspects of the feedback that was going.
But there's something wrong with that process. You go and hire consultants to do it, to advise you or to advise the ministry?
Sorry, it was the office, the National Pensions Office, DLP. That contract then was done by, again, it would have been the previous minister, previous superintendent. And that would have been to assist with the entirety of doing the investment regs, the review of the investment regs. And at that point, our office then was doing work, and we needed some feedback in relation to what the stare would have been on it. And that is apparently, from my understanding, where it stalled.
But again, forgive me, I don't want to sound pedantic, but the steering should have been done before the consultancy was employed. And you say now that you have the report from the consultancy, and what's holding it up is the ministries deciding where we want to go?
Because it's not done in its entirety. There was a draft on it, and it was being prepared. But again, because of the specific nature of the investment regulations, it required stakeholder feedback. And that feedback then is taken into account into what actually goes into the revised regulations.
I can appreciate stakeholder feedback, but stakeholder feedback shouldn't take 4 years. Because if you were involved in drafting the legislation to which the investment regulations have to fit, because investment regulations can only do what the original law authorizes the investment regulations to do. And here we are 4 years later, and we don't have a final product in terms of what the investment. Okay.
That is
I guess I'll ask the chief officer when he comes, but.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, one of the things I would just also suggest as we're looking to move forward, I know the investment strategy is one of the things that people have been focusing on, and I understand that some of the pension providers themselves also feel as if though they're constrained by the current investment profile that they have to use. But what I would also ask at this point, especially, is to beef up supervision also. I mean, just to kind of give you an idea, I think SEMA Class A deposits is anywhere from $10 to $15 billion. And you're looking at roughly $2 billion, so probably anywhere from about 15 to 20% of what it is that SEMA is doing. And you look at the size of SEMA team versus, to kind of just give you an idea in terms of what it is that you're looking for. But one of the things I found from the UK regulator is that they took a very risk-based approach in terms of supervising these entities, and 4 areas that they look for in terms of especially direct contribution schemes is poor standards of governance, poor investment governance and inadequate cost controls, poor administrative practices, and scams and the misappropriation of scheme assets. Those are the kind of things that they're focusing on. And what I would like from your department going forward is to take the same risk-based approach, to start looking at these guys. I mean, the law as it stands right now still gives you as director a very broad authority in terms of even going into businesses, getting information and everything of what it is that you can ask for. But the most important thing is actually knowing what to ask for. So I don't know if you get quarterly management accounts from them. If not, I think you should. And not wait until 12 months down the line where something is going sideways. So if you see something happen in the first quarter, you kind of make a note of it. By the second quarter, you see that no actions are coming. You intervene, so at least to lessen the impact 12 months down. But once you get financial statements, there's nothing that you can do to go back and change what has happened. So it is that more proactive type approach. And at the same time, too, looking at the cost structure that some of these companies have in place. Because one of the things I do have a fundamental problem with is some of the pension providers, as we were trying to summon them to come here, the amount that was overseas, the amount that was doing business in our competitors. And I can tell you right now, we're a global financial powerhouse. The Cayman Islands is. We get enough licks for it. And I do have a problem with our money being managed by our competitors. And when you look in some of the underlying assets of what those competitors are actually investing in, they're actually investing in our competitors too. When I look at some of the monies that are being used to hospitals and airport in different places, and that money could be used here, I have a problem with that. And so it is getting down into the meat of that matter. And like I said, we have enough professional expertise. The financial secretary is team, the auditor and the accountant general, very astute people, very sharp numerically, draw on those resources. Cindy's a great team at SEMA, draw on those resources, because ultimately, you guys are here to protect the public interest, and this is what it is. And what we have found is that in most regulators, and in just that way yourself, because we're going to see employment off-reg and elsewhere, because their day-to-day dealings is more with the people that they regulate, they sometimes forget that it is the public that they're working for. And I think that is the culture that we want to start seeing changing. Those pension providers are ultimately responsible to their shareholders. It is their shareholders and their bosses that determine what bonus they get. You guys are the only guys that are here to really look out for the public and the people. And that is why we need to make sure that you guys have the teeth, and also if the political will that is needed to get it done, to get it done. But that is the culture that we want change here now. Because frankly, when you start doing your job and you start increasing the supervision of some of these guys, they're just going to say, you know what, this ain't worth it no more, this gravy train is over, and they go someplace else. Because frankly, I really want to say about half of them gone. But that's just me. But I'm putting that out there, you know, at a minimum. So anyway, Mr. Chairman, I think that's my rant for today. Thanks.
Well, I have one other question based on a previous answer. You said that you're still waiting to implement certain sections of the 2016 law. Is that because those sections of the law have not been brought in by Gazette Notice and Cabinet Order, or is it because you don't have the resources to do it with?
There's a combination of, it needs a commencement order, and then it was supposed to be a structured approach where once we get the commencement order, it was given adequate time to do the additional training resources, but it really stems from getting the commencement order on those sections. And until you get a commencement order on those sections, it's kind of difficult to start doing something when there's ambiguity as to when it's going to come into effect. So it really starts with getting the commencement order on those sections. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Saunders' point, even the regulation in terms of the pension plan administrators, and that's one of the things that with the commencement of the 2016 revision and then the investment regulations, I was actually also looking at doing a separate and distinct unit, which would have been a pension plan administrator compliance unit, which would have focused dealing directly with the pension plan administrators. Because a lot of time, the enforcement on the employer pensions tends to get all the highlight. But really, in my view, we need to split it. We need to have the pension plan administrators and have a compliance unit to that to look after all of those concerns that you have, just to make sure that it's being done right, and then the separate enforcement arm of it. And to your point, it's as well a matter of culture, and even sometimes cultures within the organization. And remembering that DLP was formed with two separate departments, which means now you have to develop a different culture and give a culture that is more suited towards what you need to do. But a culture of an organization is something that takes time, and it has to go through a certain process, and it's being worked on. But definitely those are concerns that we intend to address, and I'm actively trying to have those addressed.
Can you just take us through your organizational structure in the Department of Labor and Pensions? How the department is structured?
We have three operational units. We have the pensions unit, we have the labor unit, and then we have the inspections unit. And we also then have the administrative staff.
And is there any cross, what is your inspection unit does inspections of both labor and pensions, or each has their own?
Correct. And the generic, what I've been doing is to go forward, try to avoid the culture of it's my pensions unit or my labor unit. What we've started doing is using some generic, almost generic job descriptions where they're now labor and pensions inspectors or senior labor and pensions inspectors, where they have a full authority across both labor and pensions. And for instance, like in the inspections unit, I find that it's easier and it'll be quicker as well, because when they're going to deal with a labor matter, if there's a pensions matter, then they can quickly get it into court. So we're talking into a 6-month time frame, whereas the larger pensions cases, then can take time to come through, but it makes it easier to get things along quicker in terms of enforcement by having a generic labor and pensions inspector and get away from the silos of pensions unit, labor unit.
Just in terms of going forward in the annual report, I think what would also be a good number to include it is when you add up the total amount of investment fees that they're basically paying, and well, they're charging the public, and also the total amount of admin fees. Because one of the things I would be curious to see is how much is the total cost for the asset owner management. Then we can start getting a better idea in terms of who's efficient from who's not efficient. But these are the kind of stuff that we need to start looking at in terms of, because as you said, I mean, many people are basically paying several times over. So when we start getting more into that culture, we can directly see, you know what, the public can say, no, I think I want to go to this one versus what I want to go to that one. Because I can tell you, looking at what the Auditor General have looked at, I've seen a couple of superstars to some extent in terms of what they have done in managing money. And I gotta be honest with you, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna tell the people, go put your money in them. I mean, I'm not gonna say it here, but I'm gonna say it outside there to say, well, if I were you, this is where I put my money. Because these are the guys in doing you right. And ultimately, that should finish them up. That needs to go. Because you have some people that's here that's taking money for nothing. So ideally, like I said, and I'll be more than happy to have a conversation with you offline in terms of what it is I think that from the public's interest, what we should start looking at so at least employees can make an informed decision in terms of where it is that they need to get to or where it is that they need to go. Because a lot of this information isn't public. And I really think it's unfair to people to be sticking money inside here and then waiting on someone to, one pension company has never sent me a statement. I don't know what has happened. You know, I mean, granted, it's a small amount of money, but other people could have large amounts of money, and those are the kind of things that are unacceptable. You know what I mean? So, and those, like I say, it will take time. It's still new to us here, but eventually our job is to make it better. All right, but thanks very much, and like I said, I wish your team good luck with everything else, and anything we can do to help, just let us know. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ebanks, for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give to this honorable legislative assembly shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Howell, and we apologize for your delay in waiting, but the questions, we got backed up in the first hour, and we were trying to catch up. That don't mean we have questions for you, sir. You know the routine. The first question asks you identify yourself by title and name, just for the record. You don't have to do it once. And we're here today talking about the Pensions Office and specifically the reports that have been published through their website. And a couple of things have come out so far in evidence. One is we've just been informed that there are sections of the 2016 law that are not yet implemented because they're waiting on a commencement order from Cabinet. Can you give us an update or clarification of when those sections of the law are likely to be brought in?
Good morning, sir. Wesley Howell, Chief Officer for the Ministry of Employment and Border Control. Mr. Chairman, I can say that we have discussed, so the current commencement order was one that was passed in 2016, actually gazetted in December 2016, which is a few months before the 2017 general election. The minister that took over pensions after the departmental reshuffle has not given clear advice as to when the additional sections of the amendment law, the 2016 amendment law, should come forward. We have several proposals that we've been discussing, including a sort of a radical approach to rethinking pensions in particular. So the 2016 amendment as it stands, with bits of it brought into force through that commencement order, is sort of an evolutionary approach to the 2012 legislation. The current minister would actually like to see more of a radical reform of pensions, and that caused a bit of a stalemate between executing the remaining sections of 2016 amendment or going to a more radical national pension system.
But that leaves you in a catch-22 situation, because obviously the law is the law, but it's not been, and sections have been commenced, but other sections have not been commenced. What kind of evaluation can you do on the effectiveness of the law that hasn't been commenced in terms of radicalization? You know where my position is from way back, but you can't amend bad law into good law.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think the minister has the same view as you on that one.
The other thing is we were just given evidence that a part of that is caught up in that environment is the investment regulations.
Yes, sir.
And we'd like to see if are they in the same position as the other sections of the law that were not commenced, or?
I believe the investment regulations can actually move forward, of course, with the support of the minister and the cabinet. There are some amendments to investment regulations that would bring a little bit more diversity to the types of investments, bring the national pensions closer to the public service pensions in relation to investments, and therefore give the pension providers some more room for making good investment decisions.
Another question I have is, we hear that the part of the problem with getting the reports done was resources and change of ministers and change of this and change of that. But that shouldn't affect the report from the year gone by. That is not yet done.
In the 2019 report?
Well, we have now up until 17, right? Right, Chris? And we have draft 2016. So we're very concerned that we need to get 17, 18, and 19 out, because next month is when you would do the 19 one, and we don't want to get any further backed up.
No, absolutely. So I made it clear to the director and the deputy director, having sat through my first finance committee, Mr. Chairman, and being scolded over then 9-year-old reports that, you know, by pressure or by otherwise, we're going to get this thing done. We bolstered the resources within the department. We assisted them through the ministry with formatting and layout, those things. We used one of our graphic designers to help with that, and we pushed through to get those reports all done. The reason that the reports were at bay wasn't the fact that the data wasn't there. Literally, when we inherited DLP as part of the reshuffle in 2017, the decision was taken at that time that all the arrears would be published at one time as opposed to piecemeal, which is fair enough as long as it doesn't take forever for that to happen. So they were working through very diligently. It was something that I constantly prodded and pushed during our biweekly management meetings with the DLP team, and I really didn't want to face the wrath of Mr. Saunders when we came back to another finance committee and not having those done. So those are done. The data is in for the 2018, the 2019 data. According to the law, the providers have 6 months to provide their information to DLP. He would then work that into their report. So at the end of June would be the 6 months for the 2019 data to be in. And on my way driving down there, I overheard the director making a commitment for the end of the year, which would give him 6 months to make those reports complete. That would be 18 and 19. I think 6 months is a bit generous at this point, so I would be pushing for them to get them done faster than that. So.
Another matter of concern that has been given in evidence this morning is we don't have a functioning board, and the last board meeting was February or somewhere around that 2019.
Yes, sir.
Is there any particular reason why we haven't reappointed a board? Or
so the board is one of those matters that got caught up in this transition law. So the transition bits that came into force with the commencement order of 2016 essentially removed one major oversight aspect from the board, and that's for the law and the implementation of the actual law aspects. So those were removed from the board and vested in the director of DLP. The board members expressed several times to me as chief officer their sort of frustration in not being able to fulfill their mandate in relation to the rest of their sort of recommendations to government in relation to how pensions could be improved because of the lack of timeliness in relation to the data coming to them. So they felt not able to function. So we have proposed that the reappointment of the board, seeing that the board remit has changed significantly in that the oversight of the investments and those are now vested in the government, which is not where I think they ought to be. I'll say that for the record. I much agree with the members who spoke earlier this morning about oversight being done by an entity such as SEMA in relation to how investments are done and the accuracy of those investments and effectiveness of those investments. So the board members made some recommendations as to what the board could be tasked with. Those are now on board, and the proposal that I have for the minister is that the board appointments now would actually be given a terms of reference that covers the requirements of what they ought to be delivering within the law, but are also tasked with going through, and if it is a radical review of pensions that is needed at this point, which I think we all agree that some radicalness is needed there, then this board could be tasked with the public consultations and those sorts of things to get that ball rolling. So that is the recommendation that we have before the minister in relation to filling that out.
when do you expect a board to be appointed?
So the board, the last two appointments fell away just as we went into shelter in place. I've had some discussions, preliminary discussions with the minister, so that should be something that we should be able to do quite soon here, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, through you. And first of all, Mr. Howell, I want to thank you for getting these reports prepared. I greatly appreciate it, and once again, you have renewed my confidence in you as being an effective chief officer. I must say that I've always found to be very decent and professional, and just by getting where we are today is testimony to that. So I just want the record to reflect that. One of the things that I'm curious on, and this comes back as the pension gets bigger, we get more employed people, and the economy is growing, is at what point, I mean, we're at $2 billion now. I mean, it's one thing when you started this in 98, and you had probably $100 million. But when you start seeing $100 million in contributions each year, that kind of stuff coming in, that in the next 10 years, that's another $1 billion worth of contribution. Granted, you do have payouts and disbursement. At what point does the supervision process of pension investments itself? Because I think there's a big difference between complying with the pension law to make sure that people are paying pensions, but then there's the investment element that requires a little bit more teeth.
Yes.
At what point are we going to sit back and say, well, all of these pension providers need to be regulated by SEMA? So at least from a financial statement standpoint, because what you don't want is to start duplicating financial expertise that is in one regulator, namely SEMA, to another department in terms of labor and pension. I mean, those pension providers themselves, I think, as they're getting bigger and more complicated and having assets the size of some bank's balance sheet, I think we need to start looking at moving them or changing their regulatory environment to one that's more technical, but at the same time, and have Department of Labor and Pension function or focus on paying. One of the things I noticed in the UK is that they have the regulator, but they also have a pensions ombudsman that dealt with the complaints in terms of, you know, who's not paying what or who's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And I think, I mean, and I'm just putting it out there because ultimately it's you all to decide in terms of what advice you're going to give to the minister, is that more move DLP into the pensions ombudsman role to deal with complaints and everything else, and then move the technical side to SEMA or another entity or whatever that is equipped to analyze and go through these financial statements and these investments and everything else. So I just want to put that out there and see what your thoughts are.
Thank you, Mr. Saunders. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I've had he's not here, the privilege of serving as a board member on the public service pensions under the chairmanship of the FS. And we've seen the mechanisms for which sort of a well-experienced, well-suited investment subcommittee work to scrutinize the investments done by the plan, and the investment manager for which the public service pensions hired on their behalf scrutinize those investments as well. See how well that scrutiny does actually hold fingers to the fire in relation to ensuring that the investments are sound, and that if they're not, that corrective action can be taken relatively quickly. I've seen that work really well within the public service pensions, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that is something that would be necessary in the private sector pensions plan. And we have talked about SEMA taking on that role, even if it's just the investment level. I still think that there needs to be that level of pensions experience that we may have to source or build ourselves in order to bridge the gap between investments, which are more generic, and then sort of pension administration, which is very specific, I believe, sir. So I agree with you with that.
Yeah, thank you very much. The thing about it is, as and like I said, the point we're trying to get to this morning is a change in the culture. Let's be realistic. Since the pension laws come about in 1998, when it came about, as far as I'm aware, this is the first time we're getting into the nitty-gritty in terms of pension itself. And it has grown to a point where, when it started out 10 years ago, what people would have accumulated, they wouldn't be paying it much mind now. But now, with people taking an active look at their pension statements, and what we want to go, and the reason why you're here today is more on the governance side, because ultimately the DLP falls on the you as chief officer.
Yes, sir.
And what we want ultimately, or the comfort, is that supervision element of that department. And like I said, I do recognize that there are shortcomings within it, but the public has certain expectations. And it's a matter now of balancing those expectations in terms of also the resources that you do have, and in terms of how this can be better going forward. So with that said, I think it is definitely worth, looking at the model that you have in the Public Service Pension Board, because if there's one fallacy that the public has, and I'm going to tell you, the Public Service Pension Boards have disproved that. There's this belief somehow that the private sector does stuff better than the government. The Public Service Pension Board proves that the government can be more efficient and effective when they're ready to be. You know what I mean? And I think the Public Service Pension Board, because I've looked at their numbers, and that's far more efficiently run than many of these other providers that we do have. And I would love to eventually one day see that expanded to start even taking even some of the private sector money, at least where we have the option to do so. Because I can tell you, I intend to take my private sector pension money, some of it, and move it over into the public service pension. And I have no problem saying that right here inside here. You know what I mean? So from that standpoint, I think now as we're looking forward, 9 providers, and as we said to Mr. Banks, who was here earlier, is that when you start breaking out the investment fees, the admin fees, and looking at the assets under management and what the public is paying for. I have one financial statement, which I showed with the member from Prospect a while ago, where they lost money. Last year when everybody was making money, they lost money. But yet, you can look in the administrative costs that they still got paid. What purpose are they out there doing with people's money? You know what I mean? So this is ultimately what it is that we want, so the public can make a decision in terms of how best to invest their money and where they're comfortable putting their money. And that's what we want to see from the annual reports. The law is there. The law is for the benefit of the employees, and we want the annual reports now to be written in the lens of the employees whose money it is at reporting. And I think ultimately that's where we need to get to, so they can make a decision.
Absolutely. So Mr. Chairman, through you again, in relation to the annual reports, the one sort of pre-2017, the goal of the ministry there was to publish the reports that were the data that was collected. So other than formatting and the assistance with moving things along, we didn't go in and argue about what should be in or not in those reports. But I have taken on board some of the comments that I heard earlier when I was sitting in the hallway in relation to the level of detail that those reports ought to have to ensure that the public is adequately informed within the confines of the law as to what the performance of the individual plans are, and in fact how well or not well their money is doing. So yeah, I agree with you there as well, sir.
Mr. Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a number of questions, largely for the record, but also to probe a little more into the publishing of these delayed annual reports. And certainly the first question I believe the member from Bordentown West touched on, but as a matter of record, can you tell this committee when did you assume ministerial responsibility for pensions?
End of May, June 2017, when the government...
Chief Officer of the Ministry?
Yeah.
Responsibility for pensions, yes, sir?
Yes, sir. End of May, June of 2017, following the election and the reshuffling of the government departments.
So you're brand new, just like myself and Councillor Connolly.
Yes, sir.
Upon taking up that responsibility, I think you said in June 2017, what steps did you and your team take to address the long outstanding question of the missing National Pension Board annual reports from 2008 to 2016?
So we went through and determined, what reports were completed, what stage of completion each of the reports in, and we've set some clear guidelines and offered support in relation to resources to get those reports up to date. Chased down the former chairman and board members to get those reports then ratified by them and then ready for publication. So it was really drawing a line in the sand to say that we've come to the end of the rope in relation to not having those reports out, and it was the priority of the ministry, and we made it the priority of the department at that time to make that happen, sir.
Why did the ministry wait until June 2020, which I believe it was, March 2020, in response to the Freedom of Information inquiry by the Ombudsman to publish these reports and not do so immediately after assuming responsibility when you took office in 2017?
Thank you, sir. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I touched on it a little bit earlier. Some of the very early reports were done, some of the other ones were not. And the decision then that we took from the ministry in consultation with the minister, the premier, was that we would publish all those reports in block and deliver them all at the same time. So we were mindful that the last report was in draft form and near completion. So we were expecting to have that done at one of the scheduled sittings of the LA coming up this year, sort of pre-COVID sittings.
Thank you. The final question, it's a bit more protracted question. It seeks broader probity, but I have to ask it, otherwise members of this committee would accuse me of taking it easy on you. Greater oversight was highlighted as a missing or needed component in the current pension regime as a means of ensuring quality returns for persons at retirement, particularly against the backdrop of the recent pension withdrawals being allowed as part of the COVID relief efforts of the present administration. However, I think you would agree, but certainly you can disagree, a focus on short-term nominal returns on investments hides the fact that returns are only one of several factors that will determine the performance of a pension fund to provide retirement income to their members once they retire. Those factors include, and again, we touched on them earlier with other witnesses, administrative and investment management costs, density of contributions, the behaviors of the members in choosing a retirement age, and the number of pension providers overall in the market. There's no way to increase the density of contribution in the Cayman Islands because the National Pensions Law requires that everyone between the age of 18 and 65 must contribute to a pension fund and only exempts full-time students and non-Caymanian, non-permanent resident domestic helpers. So there's no one else being left out to capture, to increase that density. The retirement age affects pension funds because the accumulation period in countries that allow persons to retire earlier means that they receive less retirement income upon retirement. As a consequence, again, governments like those in the Cayman Islands have raised the retirement age and introduced incentives to delay retirement. So once again, there's very little cushion in which we can do more to improve those returns. That leaves only the number of pension providers. Whilst administrative costs, and I believe the member from Bordentown West articulately identified how these administrative costs vary by administrator, whilst these may perhaps can be better regulated, would you agree that a more radical approach would be to reduce the number of pension providers on island, whether it be to start with those who consistently fail to reach their mandate, those who are losing money, whilst others are earning money, and perhaps replaced with the introduction of a national pension fund administered by the government?
Thank you, sir. Through you, Mr. Chairman. You're right, Councillor, you're not taking any dizzy on me because that's a quite loaded question you've asked there. In general, if there are many players in the market and the market is sort of at saturation, there is some losses through the lack of economies of scale, so the diminishing return on having sort of too many players for too little pot. So yes, if there was a move to marginalize those numbers of providers down to a more competitive number, and if there was more transparency in what was provided to Joe Public about the performance of each of the pensions plans, natural course of decision making might well take its way, and folks will gravitate towards the ones that are performing better and leaving the ones that are not behind. So those are some things that I think we can think about as we go forward with what the future of the pensions law looks like. I'm actually in favor of competition. I think it helps to sharpen the pencils and ensure that folks are playing their best possible game. But competition only works well when there's transparency as to what's going on. If nobody knows who's winning and who's losing, and the competition has no meaning there. I think the other bit that is a hard decision, and it's one that would affect businesses and individuals as well, because it would affect what take-home pay they have. We also need to take a hard look at the pension contribution rate as well, with the retirement age and the health of our population, the number of years that folks will live on in retirement. My own dad at 105 and still going. I think he's off the actuarial charts altogether. But but him aside, there is, if you're only contributing the minimum, you're not going to have enough in retirement to maintain a reasonable lifestyle. And as I think Mrs. Saunders mentioned earlier, you're going to end up needing some support either from family or the government, from NAU or some otherwise. So yeah, I think there's room for a combination of increased transparency into the performance of the management team within the pension funds and how those are invested and the fees that they charge, the administrative costs, the overheads. There's some room for, I think, amalgamation within the market to have fewer players that are better at their game. And yeah, there is some room, I think, for increasing the pension contribution rate as well. Even though that's a difficult decision, I think it's a necessary one.
Just first of all, thank the witness for those comprehensive answers. And just an observation, Mr. Chairman, certainly I do hope by asking you such a loaded question, it will not compromise our otherwise very positive working relationship within the ministry, which I've enjoyed for the last 3.5 years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I suggest that the likelihood of radical reform in pensions with election less than a year away is not likely to happen, because I have personal experience in dealing with the private sector in trying to put proper pensions in place. Would it not be better to commence the sections of the 2016 law and the investment regulations so at least the pensioners can get the benefit of those improvements in the law in the interim period it's going to take to radicalize pensions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's a very fair comment. And based on what I've heard from the lobby this morning in relation to the information that the Auditor General has provided to committee, there is room for that to be effective sooner rather than later. So that's something I will take back, sir.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Chris?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Owell. The issue that I have in all of this, and this goes back again, that before we can even have the radical changes, is that we're now just seeing people paying a lot of interest to pensions now because of the early withdrawal, and when they start seeing exactly what their pension have produced. Because I hold it the view that, I mean, granted, some people have been invested in pension for 20 years. And if in 20 years you can't see a reasonable rate of return on your money, and if a provider can't make money in 20 years, I don't see leaving them with that money for another 20 going to make a difference, because their culture would have been set. I think in order for us to get the public to the point where they're going to say, I mean, everyone has accepted that they're unhappy with it. But for us in our position, we have to also have a replacement, because first of all, let's establish something. Pensions are needed. I'm not going to sit back and tell anyone it is not. It is needed. But in order for anyone to make any decision, they need to have adequate information to do so. And I think it is when we start putting that information out in the public now that people can say, wait a minute, why is this pension plan doing well? Why is this one not doing this? Why is this not doing that? And then the market forces can start to work. And I think that is really where the change is. And I think getting these annual reports out timely, but with the proper information through the lens of an employee, that they can sit back and say, wait a minute now. because the intention of the law was, and those reports, was for people to know what those providers were doing. I mean, no one expects everyone to be sitting down and combing through audited financial statements to see what it is they're doing. They just want to know if they're making money and they're efficient. That's ultimately what they're looking for. And that is really where I would want those annual reports to get to, through the eyes of the employees, in terms of what would the employees want to read, what it is that they would want to see. And then I think we can start seeing more people start, like, wait a minute, because you know the talk shows are going to light up. The minute one realizes someone just lost, and someone messaged me already, I want to know who it is that lost at 9 or 10% in 2018, you know what I mean? So they can take their money out. Of course, I'm not going to tell them. But from that standpoint, yeah, well, they should know. But from that standpoint, I think that's where the difference going to come from. Because I'm not too keen in terms of pushing more investment or changing the investment profile without changing the supervision profile with it too. Because we have a very conservative profile as it stands right now. And if you can't make money in a conservative, or you lose the money in a conservative profile, which is supposed to be the blue chip type approach that at least give you annual 4 to 6% every year, and you can't produce that, giving you something more aggressive with more risk. And for some of these guys, I ain't buying that yet. You know what I mean? But without the proper supervision in place to rein people in check, because what you don't want them to do is taking on more investment risk, but we don't have the supervision in place to manage those more complicated risks. And I think ultimately, that's what we need to get to. I will close with one observation from Warren Buffett back in 2003 when he spoke about weapons of financial mass destruction. And what he said was that capitalism itself was built on people doing something, doing it well, and making money from it. The problem that we have now is that there are too many people making money, not from doing something, but from managing other people's wealth. Other people's sweat and hard work is being managed by other people. And when those people are making more money than the very people whose money it is, that's a problem. We see it with insurance. When insurance companies start making more money than the doctors who providing the service, those are the kind of red flags that start popping up. So ultimately, like I said, it is a certain culture we need to change, and that's where we need to get to. And your department and your ministry can only do so much. Some of it will require political leadership, and that's for us to do. But I really want to thank you personally for getting these reports out, and for the professionalism and always the level of decency that you have always brought to the role. Bernard, great guy. Miss Amy, great woman. But I recognize also that for what it is that they're tasked with, it is a gigantic task, and the resources isn't there. And I think this is a chance now for us to start having a difficult conversation in terms of how we want to structure them going forward as the pension continue to grow. But to task them to manage a $2 billion portfolio of 70-something thousand accounts with 8 people, it is unrealistic, if I'm going to be brutally honest. And I really do feel bad for them. And ultimately, the public is always quick to pick on the regulators and forget that it is the people who are stealing their money that they need to be picking on. So, I mean, I just want to close with that, but I just want to thank you and your team for the job that you have been doing.
Just one last question. The current national pension legislation does not allow employees to pick the pension plan, right? It's the employer who picks the pension plan, and when you come into their employment, you join their pension plan.
I stand to be corrected, sir, but I believe that the employers can pick their pension plan. The employees, yes. The employers may have a preference, and they may have their bulk of their pensions with a particular provider. But I believe it is the employee's decision as to where that is invested. I stand to be corrected, but that's my understanding, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time, sir. And we look forward to getting the rest of the reports out before the end of the year, and then getting back on track of keeping them up to date. Thank you very much.
As do I, sir. Thank you very much for your time and your committees, and for your insight.
Take a break until 1:15 because we have the next set of witnesses are coming from BAF Cayman Pension Plan, and they're all coming in on Zoom at 1:30, so we all need to be in hall at 1:30 when we connect up.